Okay. Now there's no video recording, but only voice recording. But I'm also recording this on the video on my mobile phone, so I will put it on YouTube. So this is chapter 9. The day of our departure being come, I took leave of His Highness, the Governor of Gladabdrip, and returned with my 2 companions to Maldonada, where, after a fortnight's waiting, a ship was ready to sail for Lagnac. The 2 gentlemen and some others were so generous and kind as to furnish me with provisions and see me on board. I was a month in this voyage. So he has another voyage now, and he arrives in Maldonada, and I skipped the next 2 paragraphs and next page, and there's a paragraph that begins with the dispatch. The dispatch came from court about the time we expected. So the king wants to see Gulliver before he leaves. And it contained a warrant for conducting me and my retinue to Tralbragdap and Trildrobdrip, for it is pronounced both ways as near as I can remember, by a party of 10 horse. All my retinue was that poor lad for an interpreter, whom I persuaded into my service, and at my humble request we had each of us a mule to ride on. A messenger was dispatched from half a day's journey before us to give the king notice of my approach, and to desire that his majesty would please to appoint a day and hour when it would be his gracious pleasure that I might have the honor to lick the dust before his food stool. To lick the dust before his food. So, this is the court style. When you enter the palace, when you enter the king's room, you have to lick the dust on the floor, by the king's feet. This is the court style, and I found it to be more than matter of form. For upon my admittance 2 days after my arrival, I was commanded to crawl on my belly and lick the floor as I advanced. But on account of my being a stranger, care was taken to have it made so clean that the dust was not offensive. So because he is a stranger and he's a guest, they clean the floor very well, that the dust doesn't disturb his neck, doesn't fill his mouth and his tongue. Okay. However, this was a peculiar grace, was not allowed to any persons of the highest rank when they desired an admittance. Nay, sometimes the floor is strewn with dust on purpose, when the person to be admitted happens to have powerful enemies at court. And I have seen a great lord with his mouth so crammed that when he had crept to the proper distance from the throne, he was not able to speak a word. Neither is there any remedy, because it is capital for those who receive an audience to spit or wipe their mouths in His Majesty's presence. So, if an unfavorable person, if any enemy of the king enters the king's court, then they spray some poison onto the floor with the dust, and if the enemy licks the dust, he gets poisoned. And it is very offensive to spit out the dust from your mouth in front of the king. The next paragraph. To return from this digression, when I had crept within 4 yards of the throne, I raised myself gently upon my knees, and then striking my forehead 7 times on the ground, I pronounced the following words, because they teach him the following words, as they had been taught me the night before. Ikplink, Glothrop, Screechserum, Fliop, Mlashalt, Swin, Tnotblak, Glof, Slipov, Asht. Impossible to pronounce. This is the compliment established by the laws of the land for all persons admitted to the king's presence. It may be rendered into English thus: May your celestial majesty outlive the sun 11 moons and a half. To this the king returned some answer, which although I could not understand, yet I replied as I had been directed. Floft drin Yedric dwoldom prastrat mirpush, which properly signifies my tongue is in the mouth of my friend. So my friend will speak instead of me. Translator. Okay, by this expression was meant that I desired leave to bring my interpreter, the translator. So this is how he communicates with the Maldonado king. In chapter 10, Lagnac. He's in Lagnac now. Lagnacians are a polite and generous people. And although they are not without some share of that pride which is peculiar to all Eastern countries, yet they show themselves courteous and strangers, especially such who are countenanced by the court. I had many acquaintance among persons of the best fashion, and being always attended by my interpreter, the conversation we had was not disagreeable. One day, in much good company, I was asked by a person of quality whether I had seen any of their Straldbrugs, or immortals. So in this country, there's a group of people called Straldbrugs, who are immortal people. I said I had not, and desired he would explain to me what he meant by such an appellation applied to a mortal creature. He told me that sometimes, though very rarely, a child happened to be born in a family with a red circular spot in the forehead, directly over the left eyebrow, which was an infallible mark that it should never die. So if a child born with a red spot on his forehead, it shows that that child is never going to die. So he or she is an immortal. Okay, the spot, as he described it, was about the compass of a silver threepence, but in the course of time grew larger and changed its color, for at 12 years old it became green, so continued till 25, then turned to a deep blue. At 45, it grew coal black. So at 25, in 12 years, the color becomes green. At 25, it becomes blue, deep blue. And at 45, it grows black. All right? And after the age of 45, it never changes. He said these birds were so rare that he didn't believe there could be above 1,100 Straldbrugs of both sexes in the whole kingdom. All right. I freely own myself, this is the next paragraph, I freely own myself to have been struck with inexpressible delight upon hearing this account. And the person who gave it me happening to understand the Balnibarbian language, which I spoke very well, I could not forbear breaking out into expressions perhaps a little too extravagant. I cried out as in rapture, "Happy nation where every child had at least a chance for being immortal." So first, Gulliver thinks that this is a great thing to be immortal. Happy people who enjoy so many living examples of ancient virtue and have masters ready to instruct them in the wisdom of all former ages. But happiest beyond all comparison are those excellent Straldbrugs who, being born exempt from that universal calamity of human nature. Then he imagines if he were an immortal. This is on the next page 229 in my edition. that if it had been my good fortune to come into the world as Stralbrug, so if I were born as Stralbrug, an immortal, he says, as soon as I could discover my own happiness by understanding the difference between life and death, I would first resolve by all arts and methods whatsoever to procure myself riches. So, he says you could be rich, because if you have an immortal life, you have enough time to save a fortune, in the pursuit of which by thrift and management I might reasonably expect in about 200 years to be the wealthiest man in the kingdom. In the second place, I would from my earliest youth apply myself to the study of arts and sciences, by which I should arrive in time to excel all others in learning. So if you have enough time, an immortal life, then you would learn so many languages, you would learn so many arts and so many professions. Lastly, I would carefully record every action and event of consequence that happened in the public, impartially draw the characters of the several successions of princes and great ministers of state with my own observations on every point. So he says that he records, he writes down everything in history, and in his immortal life you can write the history of the world. And I would exactly set down the several changes in customs, language, fashions of dress, diet, and diversions, by all which acquirements I should be a living treasury of knowledge and wisdom, and certainly become the oracle of the nation. You see, you would have, you would be very lucky to learn so many things. If I were immortal, he says, I would never marry after 60, but live in an hospitable manner, yet still on the having side. So he would never marry after 3 times. I would entertain myself informing and directing the minds of hopeful young men by convincing them from my own remembrance, experience, and observation, fortified by numerous examples of the usefulness of virtue in public and private life. But the immortal life, the Stralbrugs are not so happy people. On the next page, next paragraph, these Stralbrugs and I would mutually communicate our observations and memorials through the course of time, remark the several gradations by which corruption steals into the world, oppose it in every step by giving perpetual warning and instruction to mankind, which, added to the strong influence of our own example, would probably prevent that continual degeneracy of human nature so justly complained of in all ages. I skip the next 2 paragraphs. I enlarged upon many other topics, which the natural desire of endless life and sublunary happiness could easily furnish me with. When I had ended, and the sum of my discourse had been interpreted as before to the rest of the company, there was a good deal of talk among them in the language of the country, not without some laughter at my expense. At least the same gentleman who had been my interpreter said he was desired by the rest to set me right in a few mistakes which I had fallen into through the common imbecility of human nature, upon that allowance was less answerable for them. So, as I said, they introduce him to Stralbrugs, and he realizes that they are not so happy a nation. After this preface, he gave me a particular account of the Stralbrugs among them. He said they commonly acted like mortals till about 30 years old, after which by degrees they grew melancholy and dejected, decreasing, increasing in both till they came to fourscore. So he says that until 30 years of age, they are very happy, they live like mortals, but after the age of 30, they grieve, melancholic, and they go into loneliness, and at the age of 40, they are totally lonely. This he learned from their own confession, for otherwise there not being above 2 or 3 of that species born in an age. They are too few to form a general observation by. When they came to fourscore years, which is reckoned the extremity of living in this country, they had not only all the follies and infirmities of other old men, but many more which arose from the dreadful prospect of never dying. So they realize, after the age of 40, that the prospect of never dying is such a terrifying thing, because you know that you're never going to die, and you know that your mortal friends will die, and you will be so lonely in the world. You have no friends. They were not only opinionative, peevish, covetous, morose, vain, talkative, but incapable of friendship, and dead to all natural affection, which never descended below their grandchildren. So it's a terrible reality, actually. In the next paragraph, if a Strauss-Brack happened to marry one of his own kind, the marriage is dissolved, of course, by the courtesy of the kingdom, as soon as the younger of the two comes to be fourscore. So when they come to the age of 40, the marriage is dissolved, okay, and by the state, because the law thinks it a reasonable indulgence that those who are condemned without any fault of their own to a perpetual continuance in the world should not have their misery doubled by the load of a wife. You know, Jonathan Swift is not very kind to women because having an endless life, immortal life, is heavy enough. All right, and making this doubled by the load of a wife is not very justice. It's not very just. So at the age of 40, the marriage is dissolved. Okay, now I'm ending this session and start the new session in 5 minutes.